To begin this presentation, one should understand that water and access to drinking water is a human and earth creature right. Okay. Now, the key to resolving the industrial use of drinking water in any community comes down to Riparian Water Rights Doctrine, which is in all East Coast laws that I'm aware of. But the key thing here is that if someone has lived in a place all their life, or even a short period of time, and had access to reliable water, just because somebody moves in or comes in with economic development does not give them access to your water, especially if you're going to impact that water. The citizens can, after a hearing, make a decision as to whether or not to bequeath some sort of water transfer to any new neighbor, because you don't want to deny a new neighbor water. Okay. But it has to be done such in a manner that it doesn't harm other folk. Okay. You take here, when we say the aquifer, we mean the surface aquifer, including reservoirs, streams, that sort of thing, as well as the subterranean aquifer, the water table below the ground. We consider it the same atmospheric, and persons who are human, who are drilling wells and or relying on surface water, are doing the same thing. Okay, so for hundreds of years, let's say Richmond, Virginia, has been using the James River as its water supply, okay? And you find that somewhere upstream, somebody has built a dam or has built a intake or ultra deep well so that it impacts that drinking water supply downstream, downriver, okay? You now have somebody who's impacted the Riparian Water Rights Doctrine of the city and residents of Richmond, Virginia. If, say, a county upstream from Richmond starts to intake water, they have built a dam. Now, in the case of many communities that have drinking water systems, okay, those drinking water systems have been in place for years. So the wells they've driven, that sort of thing, okay? But they can, depending on drought and that sort of thing, depend on a pretty steady flow of water. But when you bring in something or something like an ultra-deep well for an industrial park, okay? Or you start to divert water that was intended in a reservoir, drinking water reservoir, for industrial uses like a manufacturing plant or an indoor corn farm or whatever, or even worse, data centers, you start to put in a dam upstream from existing folk that have depended on that water all their lives. In 3 days without drinking water, you will be dead. 3 days without drinking water, you'll be dead. So in the case of, and here's what's really the promise, the hope that all others have not imagined, is that because of this doctrine here, it doesn't matter what they've already done, okay? Because there's a story of an old farmer up in central Virginia. He's got cattle all over the place, and he has streams that his cattle drink out of. Well, I asked him, I said, what would you do if one day a new neighbor moved upstream from you, bought the land up there, and then decided he wanted a pond and he dammed up your stream in order to fill his pond? What would you do? What would you think about that? And this old man got real agitated. When I said real agitated, I mean real agitated. He said, oh no, he can't do that. No, he's got to pull that out. It doesn't matter how much he spent to put that thing in. It doesn't matter who he is. Doesn't matter what his intent was, okay? Everything that he put in that jams up my stream has got to be pulled out and put back the way it was. Because by Riparian Water Rights, a new developer or a new neighbor that comes in from, say, Colorado into Virginia, as an example, doesn't have the right to your water, okay? Now, the aqua farms are already using water. The towers that you see where these data centers are yet to be built are already pulling water out of your aquifer and impacting your normal surface flows, okay? Because if you've got a 20-foot well and they've got a 700-foot well, okay, so at some point you're going to lose water if they go down below 20 feet and start pulling that water out. Okay. This ultra deep well has to be pulled out or filled up so that it matches the aquifer wells that are existing around there. You can't give a developer access to ultra deep wells. You also can't use or give a developer access to your reservoir for a cooling loop for a small nuclear reactor or a data center or any other industrial use where they're using water either in a loop or evaporative cooling to remove heat. In either case, if you're using the reservoir that way, what you do, you've now thermally polluted, heat polluted the reservoir, and you've turned clean drinking water green. Thou shalt not allow development in any form to impact existing citizens. And your right as Riparian Water Rights Doctrine people is that if any of these items here have impacted your reservoir, you have the right to tell them to remove the complete dam. In other words, an industrial park has been pulling water for the last 10 years, has been dropping the reservoir. You can restrict, if not remove, all of that usage. The same thing with aqua or hydroponic farms. You say, well, they don't use much water. That's all they use is water. And then in Central Virginia, outside of Richmond, Henrico and Hanover's data centers and the contracts they made years ago in regards to drinking water supply from the city into the counties is really null and void, because you now have industrialization of a Central Virginia, Richmond's water supply. The Riparian Water Rights Doctrine is all that's required for the city of Richmond to now take control of the outflow to Hanover or Henrico's data parks. Because the reason that you had a failure this January, a failure in May, is because your water system has gone down below critical mass because you're pulling so much water. They're pulling so much water in the outer counties on these data centers that it is straining your water supply. Now, if you think about this in closing, what has changed in the last 50 years where you've had reliable water in Richmond, Virginia for 50 years? And then suddenly you now have a water crisis, okay? One that could be dealt with by SCADA and that sort of thing. However, the institutional knowledge necessary to solve these problems doesn't exist in the city, and it can't be purchased by consultation. One who is aware of terrestrial engineering and planetary mechanics can turn a city into a generator and a producer of water by just simply circulating atmospheric air. Regenerative energy design, red energy, aquatic planetary intelligence, takes the knowledge of planetary mechanics and applies it to repairing and turning back to resonant frequency the planet Earth. But where you start is your mastery of water. Where you start is asserting your human rights over your Riparian Water Doctrine so that you restore your communities to good drinking water health. To do that is the start of a generational jubilee, one that will change everything from mourning into joy.